Let's talk straight tonight. We're dealing with one of the most emotionally charged and morally tangled issues of our time, terminal illness and the right to die. This is not just about legislation or philosophy. It's about real people facing real pain, real fear, and real loss. A terminal illness is not simply a diagnosis, it's a sentence. It strips away your plans, your identity, your power to choose how your story ends. For many, the idea of slowly deteriorating while loved ones stand by helplessly is more terrifying than death itself. And when that fear becomes overwhelming, it's no surprise some people begin to ask the hardest question of all: do I have the right to choose when this ends? Pain, we often assume, can be medicated, but not all pain is physical. Watching your body fail, your speech slur, your independence fade, those aren't bruises or broken bones. That's a kind of suffering that cuts deeper. It's emotional, it's spiritual. It's the kind of agony that steals a person's dignity one day at a time. Medical technology might keep the heart beating, but it can't force a person to feel whole. And for those living in that slow-motion collapse, the right to die becomes not an escape from life, but a way to protect what little of their humanity they feel they still have. People often confuse choosing death with giving up. They call it selfish, cowardly, weak, but let's be clear, making the choice to end your life when your body is failing and your spirit is exhausted, that takes a kind of bravery most people can't understand. It's not about surrender, it's about having a say. When someone knows they're fighting a battle they cannot win, sometimes the only decision left is when to put down the sword. And if we really love someone, shouldn't we respect that kind of clarity? The emotional toll this takes on families is devastating. One sibling wants to hold on, keep hope alive, believe in a miracle. The other whispers, let them go. Both are trying to act from love, and yet love becomes the battlefield. Parents, children, spouses, they are torn between hope and reality, between doing everything and doing what's right. There's guilt. There's grief before the goodbye, and often there's no road map to navigate the chaos of a decision that feels like choosing between two kinds of heartbreak. Doctors are in an impossible position. They are trained to preserve life, not guide someone gently toward the end of it. And yet, they are often the ones sitting beside a patient who's done everything, tried everything, and finally says, "Please, let me go." Doctors are not gods. They can't cure the incurable, and yet many are forced to keep patients alive with machines and medication when the patients themselves are begging for release. The law binds their hands, their conscience weighs heavy, and still the suffering continues. Let's not pretend the law has all the answers. Legislators write rules, not eulogies. What looks good on paper rarely fits the chaos of real life. The right to die, when carefully handled with compassion, clarity, and safeguards, isn't about making death easy. It's about honoring the people who no longer find life bearable. Religion often takes center stage in these debates, and that voice matters, but it isn't the only one. People of all beliefs experience suffering, and they all deserve the right to speak about it, be heard, and be given a choice. The truth is, this debate isn't just about death. It's about control. It's about compassion. It's about the right to choose the ending to your own story. And if we're honest with ourselves, every one of us would want that same right if the roles were reversed. This is not an easy topic. It's raw, it's human, it's heartbreaking. But pretending it doesn't exist won't stop the pain. Talking about it openly, without judgment, with empathy, is the only way we move forward, because this isn't just about policy or opinion, it's about people. Pain isn't just physical. When we think of suffering, we often think of tubes, wheelchairs, medication, or hospital beds, but the reality of terminal illness goes far beyond what's visible. There's the ache of isolation, the humiliation of losing control over basic functions, and the mental torment of watching loved ones break down around you. People who are terminally ill aren't just grappling with disease, they're watching the very foundation of their identity crumble day by day. That kind of suffering can't be numbed by painkillers. It's psychological, emotional, and spiritual. It gnaws at hope and dignity until some begin to feel more like shadows than human beings. When people start discussing the right to die, it isn't coming from a place of despair or defeat. It's often coming from a place of clarity. It's not about giving up. It's about choosing how to leave a battle they never asked to fight. For some, the right to die is about reclaiming control in a situation where everything else has been taken away. They're not suicidal. They're not hopeless. They're simply realistic, brave enough to face their mortality, and courageous enough to say, "This is where my journey ends, and I want it to end on my terms." That decision, whether we agree with it or not, is deeply personal and deserves understanding, not judgment. The impact on families is profound. Everyone thinks they know what's best. One person says fight till the last breath, the other says let them go in peace. There are tears, arguments, and sleepless nights. Grief begins long before death ever arrives. Families are left to wrestle with guilt, fear, hope, and helplessness, often all at once. And because these conversations usually happen too late, people end up making decisions under the weight of crisis rather than with clarity and love. It's not uncommon for a family to fracture under the pressure, not just from the impending loss, but from the disagreement about how to handle it. Doctors, too, are caught in the crossfire. They're trained to heal, to preserve life, to prolong time. But they're not always taught how to address the emotional agony that lingers after the treatments stop working. They face ethical dilemmas, institutional restrictions, and personal beliefs. Some feel trapped between their oath to do no harm and their desire to relieve suffering. And while many doctors support a patient's autonomy, they're forced to tiptoe around the legal lines, often left watching people endure painful final days simply because there's no legal framework to allow a different outcome. Laws are designed to create order, but they can't legislate empathy. They draw lines around who gets to decide what and when, but real life doesn't fit into neat categories. End-of-life decisions are messy, nuanced, and deeply individual. Creating safeguards is crucial. We need to protect people from coercion or impulsive decisions, but we also need to trust mentally competent adults to make choices about their own existence. A person with a terminal illness shouldn't have fewer rights over their body than someone who is healthy. Autonomy doesn't vanish just because a doctor has delivered bad news. Religion and faith are an inseparable part of this conversation for many, and rightfully so. For some, life is sacred, and only a higher power has the right to end it. But others see death as a passage, not a punishment. They believe that ending unbearable suffering with grace can be a spiritual act in itself. There's no one size fits all answer. People live by different beliefs, and they die by them too. What we can't do is impose one belief system on every situation. Respecting a person's faith also means respecting when that faith tells them it's time to let go, or when it doesn't. This debate isn't just about medical facts or moral theories, it's about people. Real people facing the end of their lives with fear, strength, and an overwhelming need to be heard. The right to die, when carefully considered, is not about promoting death, it's about honoring life even at its end. Everyone deserves the right to write their own ending, not because life isn't precious, but because dignity is. And in those final moments, when the noise quiets and the pain settles in, what matters most is not what others think is right, but what the person in that bed believes is right for them. The right to die is not about giving up. It's about choosing how to end a fight you never asked for. When someone is diagnosed with a terminal illness, they're not just handed a timeline, they're handed a loss of control. Their future is no longer theirs, Every decision becomes a medical decision. Every day becomes a struggle to manage symptoms, pain, and fear. And when treatment no longer brings comfort or hope, some begin to question why they must continue down a path that only leads to greater suffering. Wanting the right to choose when and how their journey ends isn't about quitting. It's about reclaiming the one decision that still belongs to them. People often look at this choice from the outside and say, "Don't give up, keep fighting." But they're not the ones lying in that bed. They're not the ones who can't sleep, can't eat, can't speak without pain. Fighting is admirable, but sometimes people fight for so long and so hard that continuing becomes cruel. The right to die is about drawing a line, not out of weakness, but from strength. It's about saying, "I've had enough. I've lived with courage, and now I want to die with dignity." This is not a plea for death, but a demand for peace, for a final moment of agency in a life that's been overtaken by illness. It's easy to say that choosing death is wrong when you're not the one experiencing the decay of your own body. It's easy to preach hope when you're not the one who has outlived the usefulness of hope. For many facing terminal illness, their minds are clear while their bodies betray them. They're not making decisions out of confusion or desperation, but from a sober understanding of what lies ahead. They see the inevitable, and they're asking not to suffer through every painful second of it. That request deserves more than legal analysis or ethical debate. It deserves human compassion. Choosing to end one's life in the face of terminal illness is not a reaction to fear. It is a response to certainty, the certainty of pain, the certainty of loss, the certainty that the end is coming regardless of what anyone does. People want to spend their final days in a way that reflects who they are, not who they've been reduced to. For some, that means holding on until the very end. For others, it means stepping away from the fight before they lose themselves completely. We must stop viewing this decision as a failure. In many cases, it's the bravest thing a person can do. This is about more than just the right to die. It's about the right to decide. It's about honoring the strength it takes to say, "I've fought hard enough, and now I'm ready to rest." People who make this choice aren't rejecting life, they're choosing how to leave it. That choice should not be made in shame or secrecy. It should be protected, supported, and treated with the same seriousness and respect we give to all other life decisions. After all, if someone has the right to live on their terms, shouldn't they also have the right to die on them? We cannot continue to silence the voices of those living with terminal illness simply because their truth is uncomfortable. We must listen to them without judgment, hear their pain, and recognize that their desire to die with dignity is not an act of surrender, but a final act of self-respect. They have spent months or years in hospitals, undergoing procedures, suffering setbacks, watching their independence slip away. When they ask for the right to choose how their life ends, they are asking to be seen not just as patients, but as people, thinking, feeling human beings who want their final moment to reflect who they are, not what their illness has made them. Ultimately, the right to die is about recognizing that no one else lives in your body, endures your pain, or carries your burden. It is a deeply personal decision, shaped by experience, faith, family, and identity. And while this issue will always be complex and controversial, the people at the heart of it deserve more than just laws and opinions. They deserve empathy. They deserve the right to choose the final chapter of their lives with the same voice and strength with which they lived it. That's not giving up, that's taking control. Families are torn apart over this, and often the damage begins long before the final days arrive. When someone is terminally ill and begins to consider the right to die, it places their loved ones in an emotional storm filled with guilt, fear, and helplessness. One family member may desperately cling to the hope that something will change, while another may silently agree with the patient's wishes, feeling the heartbreak of watching someone they love slowly fade. These differing views aren't born out of selfishness or ignorance. They come from love, grief, and the fear of living with regret. Each person copes with loss in their own way, and when decisions about life and death are on the table, those differences can erupt into painful conflict. Some families believe that continuing to fight, no matter how slim the odds, is an act of loyalty. Others believe that letting go is the greatest form of compassion. Both perspectives can be true, and that's what makes it so difficult. There is no universal guidebook for how to handle watching someone suffer. Emotions run high, especially when decisions must be made quickly or under extreme stress. Conversations can turn into arguments. Silence can turn into resentment. And even after the loved one passes, family members can carry the weight of those unresolved differences for years, haunted by the decisions made or not made in those final moments. Children, spouses, and siblings may all have different understandings of what the terminally ill person truly wanted. Some may remember promises made in the past, vows to keep fighting no matter what. Others may recall tearful conversations where their loved one begged not to be kept alive by machines. These conflicting memories and emotional interpretations only complicate things further. The tragedy is that in a time when families need to come together the most, the pressure of life and death decisions often drives them apart, leaving scars that extend well beyond the funeral. Guilt plays a powerful role in these situations. Those who support the decision to die may struggle with doubts for years, wondering if they should have pushed harder for another treatment or just one more day. Those who fight to keep their loved one alive sometimes come to regret prolonging their suffering. Everyone wants to do what's right, but in these moments, right can feel like a moving target. It's an emotional tightrope, and very few walk it without falling into regret. What's needed in these moments is not just medical guidance, but emotional support, space to grieve, communicate, and most importantly, listen. What's often overlooked is how much pain family members are in themselves. They're watching someone they love deteriorate, sometimes becoming unrecognizable in the process. That pain can turn into denial, especially if the idea of letting go feels too unbearable to accept. When the person who is dying expresses a desire to end their life on their own terms, it can feel like a betrayal to those who still hope. But in reality, it's not about leaving their family behind. It's about sparing them from more pain, about choosing a path that preserves love, memory, and dignity before it's consumed by decline and disease. Communication is key, yet it's one of the first things to break down under pressure. Many families never talk openly about end-of-life wishes until it's too late. Avoiding the conversation might seem like protection, but in truth, it leaves everyone unprepared for the emotional weight of the choices ahead. Families need to talk about death before death is knocking at the door. These conversations are difficult, but they are acts of love. They ensure that when the time comes, everyone knows where they stand, and more importantly, where their loved one stood. The right to die isn't just about the individual facing a terminal illness. It's about the people surrounding them, the ones who must live with the decisions made. It's about giving families the chance to support their loved one's choice with peace instead of panic. It's about turning those final moments into a time of connection instead of conflict. When families are guided by love rather than fear, and when conversations are grounded in honesty instead of avoidance, even the most painful goodbye can carry a sense of unity. And in the face of death, unity may be the one thing that truly lasts. Doctors aren't gods. They are highly trained professionals, often deeply compassionate, but they are still human beings with limitations, biases, and emotional burdens. When someone receives a terminal diagnosis, doctors are usually the first line of defense, and society expects them to always find solutions, treatments, and cures. But the truth is, not every condition has a fix. Not every disease has a path to recovery. In cases of terminal illness, the role of a doctor shifts from saving life to easing suffering. That transition, however, isn't always clearly defined or easily accepted, not by the doctors, not by the patients, and certainly not by the family. Many doctors struggle internally with the ethical dilemma of assisted dying. They take an oath to do no harm, yet some patients see prolonging their suffering as the greatest harm of all. That contradiction weighs heavily on physicians, especially those who have walked beside patients through long, agonizing declines. Their job isn't just clinical, it becomes emotional, spiritual, and deeply personal. They witness pain that can't be measured on charts. They hear pleas for mercy that echo long after their shift ends, and yet in many places the law ties their hands. They are not allowed to respond in the way their instincts or conscience might guide them to. The system often puts doctors in a position where they must follow protocol, even when it contradicts what the patient is clearly asking for. They can prescribe medications to dull pain, but not to end suffering entirely. They can offer palliative care, but not the release some patients are begging for. This creates a frustrating and heartbreaking paradox. The very people entrusted with the care of the terminally ill are often legally forbidden from honoring the one request that might bring peace. It leaves doctors feeling helpless in the very moments when their patients need them the most. This conflict doesn't only harm patients, it damages doctors too. The emotional toll of standing by while someone suffers unnecessarily can lead to burnout, depression, and even trauma. Doctors enter the profession to help people, to alleviate suffering, and to make a difference. When they are forced to watch suffering continue against a patient's wishes, it can feel like a betrayal of their purpose. Some carry the weight of those experiences for years, haunted by memories of patients who asked for dignity and got denial instead. It's a burden no one talks about enough. There are also doctors who worry about the slippery slope, about being put in the position of deciding who gets to die and when. That fear is valid. The responsibility is enormous. No one wants a world where life is devalued or ended carelessly. That's why safeguards, psychological evaluations, second opinions, and waiting periods are essential. But when those protections are in place, and a patient is mentally sound and physically suffering, shouldn't doctors be allowed to help end that pain without fear of punishment? Compassion and control are not enemies. They can coexist within the practice of medicine when guided by ethics and humanity. It's also important to acknowledge that doctors aren't monolithic. They come from different backgrounds, religions, and personal beliefs. Some doctors will never be comfortable with assisted dying, and they shouldn't be forced to participate, but neither should their personal beliefs be used to block access for those who want that choice. Medicine must evolve to include options for end-of-life care that honor both the rights of patients and the conscience of physicians. That means building systems where those conversations are supported, not avoided, and where choices are respected, not ignored. Ultimately, the role of a doctor in the context of terminal illness must be redefined. It's not just about preserving life, it's about preserving quality of life. When that quality is gone and suffering has replaced hope, doctors should be allowed to step into the role of compassionate guides, not just clinical experts. They must have the freedom to listen deeply, to respond humanely, and to act ethically within the boundaries of consent and law. The patients who place their trust in them deserve nothing less than honesty, respect, and the dignity to make their final decisions without shame or obstruction. The law can't write a prescription for morality, no matter how many pages are written or how many committees are formed. Lawmakers can try to define what's allowed, but they cannot legislate the deeply personal emotions that come with dying or watching someone die. Legal systems are designed to create order, set limits, and ensure safety. But when it comes to terminal illness and the right to die, the human experience cannot be confined to lines in a legal document. People are not cases, and pain does not fit neatly into statutes. What's moral to one person may be deeply wrong to another, and yet both perspectives come from places of love and concern. We often expect the law to act as a compass in moments of uncertainty, but there are situations where law alone cannot lead us. Assisted dying is one of those issues. It raises questions that aren't just legal. They're spiritual, ethical, cultural, and emotional. The law might say it's illegal in one state and permitted in another. It might allow it under certain conditions or ban it entirely, but the law can't sit beside someone in pain. It can't hold their hand at 3 a.m. or listen to their fears. It can't understand the weight of prolonged suffering, the fear of dependency, or the desire to end life with dignity rather than decay. Even in places where assisted dying is legal, the process can be so burdened by red tape and regulation that it becomes inaccessible to those who need it most. Patients are often forced to jump through endless evaluations, waiting periods, and procedural hurdles. These barriers may be intended as safeguards, but sometimes they only add to a person's emotional and physical exhaustion. The law tries to protect people from misuse, but it can also end up protecting them from relief. In trying so hard not to make a mistake, it sometimes forgets the people suffering in silence while the clock runs out. Morality is deeply personal. It is shaped by family values, religious beliefs, life experiences, and cultural traditions. What one person sees as sacred, another might see as cruel. That's why a one-size-fits-all legal approach to the right to die doesn't work. Instead of pretending that there's a universal answer, we need to acknowledge that morality exists in shades of gray. We must leave room for individual choice, guided by ethical consultation, emotional support, and legal clarity. The law should not force someone to live a life they no longer consider bearable, especially when they are of sound mind and acting of their own free will. The fear of abuse is real, and it should not be dismissed. We absolutely need laws that ensure protection, especially for the elderly, the mentally ill, and those without strong advocates, but protection does not mean obstruction. Creating a safe and compassionate pathway for assisted dying does not mean we are endorsing death. It means we are honoring autonomy. When the law prioritizes safety and dignity equally, we move closer to a system that serves both the living and the dying. We must trust that people, when given the proper support and oversight, can make thoughtful decisions about their own lives. Some argue that legalizing assisted dying opens a dangerous door, but the greater danger lies in ignoring the suffering of those who have no other options. Terminally ill individuals are already dying. The question is not if they will die, but how. Will it be drawn out in pain and dependency, or will it be on their own terms, surrounded by peace? The law should not stand in the way of compassion. It should provide a framework that helps people make informed, supported choices in their final days, without shame, fear, or unnecessary suffering. In the end, laws can guide behavior, but they cannot replace humanity. They can outline procedures, but they can't understand pain. They can offer protection, but they can't offer comfort. That has to come from people, from family members, from doctors, from counselors, and from communities that choose to see death not as a failure, but as a final chapter that deserves care, dignity, and understanding. If we want to build a society that truly respects life, then we must also respect the right to end it when it is done not out of despair, but out of the deepest kind of moral clarity. Religion plays a powerful role in shaping how people think about life, death, and everything in between. For many, their beliefs offer comfort during illness and guidance during difficult decisions. Faith can help people find meaning in suffering, hold on to hope, and accept the end of life as part of a larger divine plan. Religious teachings often emphasize the sanctity of life, framing death as something that should occur naturally, not something that should be hastened by human intervention. In this view, the right to die is not a right at all. It is seen as interfering with the will of a higher power, a serious moral and spiritual concern. But faith is deeply personal, and even within the same religious tradition, individuals can interpret its messages differently. One person might see continued suffering as a test of faith, while another may believe that a loving God would not wish for someone to endure unrelenting pain. Some people find strength in Scripture, prayer, or the promise of an afterlife. Others, while still spiritual, may see choosing to die with dignity as a way to leave this life in peace rather than torment. These personal interpretations highlight the fact that religion is not a single voice, but a collection of diverse perspectives, even within a shared belief system. For those who do not follow a specific religion, the conversation takes on a different dimension. They may approach the right to die from a standpoint of personal ethics, autonomy, or humanism. They may believe that since this life is the only one we're certain of, we have the right to decide how it ends when faced with unbearable suffering. Their world isn't necessarily in conflict with religious ones. It simply comes from a different place. And in a diverse society, all of these viewpoints deserve a seat at the table. No single belief system should dictate the rights of every individual, especially in matters as intimate and personal as dying. The challenge arises when policy is shaped primarily or solely by religious doctrine. When laws reflect only one belief system, they can unintentionally silence or dismiss others. That's not a sign of a healthy society. It's a sign of imbalance. The right to die is not about promoting one view over another. It's about creating space for choice. People of faith who oppose assisted dying have every right to follow their convictions. But those convictions should not override the rights of others who, guided by their own beliefs or experiences, come to a different conclusion about what dignity and compassion mean at the end of life. This debate isn't about undermining religion. It's about expanding empathy. It's about recognizing that end-of-life decisions are incredibly complex and influenced by a wide range of values, not just spiritual ones. We must acknowledge that religious institutions, while influential, do not speak for everyone. And when we consider policies around assisted dying, we must ensure they are rooted in inclusivity, respect, and the recognition of individual belief systems. Faith can and should be a powerful guide for those who turn to it, but it cannot be the only voice that shapes law, especially when it comes to decisions about another person's suffering. There are many deeply religious individuals who support the right to die, not because they reject their faith, but because they see mercy, not punishment, in helping someone end their suffering. For them, compassion is an extension of faith, not a contradiction to it. They understand that God's love includes honoring a person's plea to end unbearable pain. This perspective is not often highlighted, but it exists, and it adds nuance to the conversation. It reminds us that religion is not monolithic. It evolves, it adapts, and it can find space for compassion within its teachings. Ultimately, we have to respect the role that religion plays in people's lives, but we also have to draw a line between personal belief and public policy. The right to die must remain a personal decision, one made in careful consultation with doctors, loved ones, and the values that matter most to the individual. For some, that will include prayer and spiritual counsel. For others, it may come down to clarity, peace, and a desire to end suffering. Both deserve equal respect. At its core, this is not just a legal or medical issue, it's a human one. And it demands that we listen to all voices, not just the loudest or most traditional, as we navigate these deeply emotional decisions. We must protect the vulnerable, but we must also trust the lucid. This balance is one of the most delicate and critical parts of the debate around the right to die. Vulnerable populations, such as the elderly, people with disabilities, or those suffering from mental illness, absolutely deserve safeguards against abuse, coercion, or hasty decisions made in moments of despair. It is our collective responsibility to ensure that no one is pressured into ending their life because they feel like a burden or because they lack access to proper care and support. Protecting the vulnerable means creating systems that are humane, thorough, and built on the principle of doing no harm. At the same time, we cannot allow our efforts to protect some to result in denying others the autonomy they have the right to exercise. There are individuals who are fully mentally competent, emotionally stable, and fully aware of their prognosis and choices. They have faced their illness with bravery and clarity, and they are not acting out of panic or depression. They are simply asking to make a decision about how their story ends. When we respond to these requests with suspicion or blanket denial, we are not protecting them. We are stripping them of dignity. We are treating them not as individuals but as liabilities. Mental competence must be assessed carefully, yes, but it must also be respected when it is clearly present. Someone in the late stages of ALS who can no longer move, speak, or swallow, yet is cognitively sharp, has a voice that must be heard and honored. These people are not confused or impulsive. They are often more aware of their situation than anyone else in the room. They have thought about this moment endlessly. They've had the hard conversations. They've faced the worst of what life has thrown at them. To deny their ability to make this choice is to invalidate all of that clarity and all of that strength. There is a dangerous assumption that people who wish to die must be emotionally unstable or temporarily overwhelmed. While that may be true in some cases, especially in people with untreated mental illness, it is not universally true. When a person is facing a prolonged, painful, and irreversible decline, their desire to end suffering is not irrational, it is human. We need to develop systems that can differentiate between a cry for help and a clear, reasoned request for release. That means involving trained professionals, second opinions, psychological evaluations, and strict protocols, not to block the decision, but to ensure it is made freely and responsibly. The truth is, autonomy cannot be selectively applied. We cannot grant people the right to make decisions about their bodies, their families, and their futures, and then suddenly revoke that right when they decide they no longer want to suffer. The ability to make choices should not be contingent on whether those choices make others uncomfortable. If someone has demonstrated mental soundness and made their intentions known, our role is not to override them, but to support them with compassion, care, and respect. Trusting the lucid does not mean abandoning caution. It means recognizing when clarity, not confusion, is driving the decision. This doesn't mean the process should be rushed or taken lightly. There must be checks and balances in place. There must be time to reflect, talk with family, and explore all medical options. But once all of that is done, once it is clear that the decision is informed, voluntary, and unwavering, it should be honored. Refusing to listen or delaying endlessly can prolong suffering unnecessarily. Compassion means acting not just with heart, but with discernment. It means acknowledging that there is a difference between protecting someone from harm and denying them peace. Ultimately, the goal must be a system that treats people as individuals, not as risks. It must offer support to those who are vulnerable, while also respecting the agency of those who are lucid and suffering. Both needs can exist side by side. We can protect those who cannot speak for themselves and still honor the decisions of those who can. We can care without controlling, and in doing so, we can create a world where dying with dignity is not seen as a failure of medicine or morality, but as an act of final and courageous self-respect. The conversation must happen before the crisis. Too often, Families are forced to make heartbreaking decisions in the middle of emotional chaos when clarity is clouded by fear and urgency. In those moments, even the most well-intentioned people struggle to make choices that reflect the true wishes of their loved one. When no conversations have taken place ahead of time, assumptions take over, people guess, they argue, they project their own fears onto the situation, and as a result, decisions that should have brought peace often lead to guilt, conflict, and lasting emotional wounds. Talking about death before it becomes a reality is uncomfortable. It forces us to confront our mortality, something most people prefer to avoid. But avoiding the topic doesn't make it disappear, it only delays the inevitable and makes it harder to manage. When someone is diagnosed with a terminal illness, the emotional impact is overwhelming. That's why having the conversation early, when emotions are less volatile and decisions can be made with a clear mind, is one of the most loving and responsible things a person can do for themselves and their family. This discussion should include not just whether someone wants to pursue every possible treatment, but also what quality of life means to them. It should explore questions like how much pain is too much, at what point does living no longer feel like life, would they want to die at home or in a hospital, who should make decisions if they no longer can. These may be difficult questions, but the answers offer a roadmap when the time comes. Without that map, families are left wandering through grief and uncertainty, unsure if they're doing the right thing. End of. Life planning is not only for the elderly or the ill. It's for anyone who wants to make sure their voice is heard, even when they can no longer speak. Whether through advanced directives, living wills, or heartfelt conversations, sharing your wishes takes the burden off loved ones when they are most vulnerable. It gives them something concrete to hold on to, a guiding light in the darkness. It also prevents unnecessary medical interventions that might prolong life but diminish dignity, something no one should have to experience against their will. These conversations don't have to be clinical or cold. They can be moments of deep connection, honesty, and even healing. They give people a chance to reflect on their values, share their fears, and offer comfort to those they will one day leave behind. It opens space for families to unite around what matters most, honoring the person they love, even when the choices are difficult. In fact, many families who have had these talks say it brought them closer, reduced tension, and made the eventual loss more bearable, even if no decision was easy. Medical professionals also benefit from these conversations. When patients have clearly expressed their preferences ahead of time, doctors can focus on respecting those wishes rather than navigating uncertainty. It creates a partnership between patients, families, and care providers, grounded in trust and understanding. That doesn't mean every decision becomes easy, but it does mean that every step is taken with purpose and respect. And when a person's final days are guided by their own voice, even death becomes less frightening, because it becomes an act of choice, not something endured in silence. In the end, talking about death doesn't bring it any closer, it simply makes us better prepared. We prepare for births, for weddings, for retirements. Why not for the one certainty that touches us all? Having the conversation before the crisis isn't morbid, it's humane. It's not about giving up, it's about showing love through clarity. When we choose to face these moments with open hearts and open dialogue, we give ourselves and those we love the greatest gift of all, peace when it matters most. This is not just about death. It's about control, compassion, and the right to write your own ending. For many facing terminal illness, the ability to make decisions begins to vanish the moment they receive their diagnosis. Suddenly, their schedule is filled with doctor appointments, treatments they didn't choose, and hospital stays they didn't plan. Their lives become dictated by medical routines and declining health. In the middle of all this, the one thing they often yearn for is some sense of control over their time, their comfort, their dignity, and their legacy. The right to die gives them a voice when everything else seems to be slipping away. Control is not about power in the traditional sense. It's about having choices when everything else feels uncertain. It's about deciding when the suffering has become too much and when to say, "This is where my road ends." People who are terminally ill have already faced so much loss. They've lost mobility, energy, and independence. Granting them the right to choose how and when their life ends is not about rushing death. It's about restoring one final piece of autonomy to someone who has already lost so much. Compassion plays a central role in this conversation. We often think of compassion as holding someone's hand through their pain, encouraging them to keep fighting. But sometimes real compassion means listening when someone says they're ready to let go. It means sitting with their truth, even when it makes us uncomfortable. Compassion is not just about keeping someone alive at all costs. It's about easing their suffering in whatever form that may take. When a person asks to end their life peacefully, they are not asking for abandonment. They are asking to be seen, heard, and supported in their most vulnerable moment. Allowing someone to write their own ending doesn't mean we're giving up on them. It means we're acknowledging that their story is theirs to tell. Each person's life is made up of choices: where they live, whom they love, how they work, what they believe. Why should the last chapter be any different? Why should the end be something they are forced to endure rather than something they can shape? Writing one's own ending is an act of self-expression, of personal truth. It reflects the same humanity and individuality that shaped every other part of their life. Too often, people are denied the chance to die in a way that aligns with who they are. They are subjected to treatments they didn't want, kept alive by machines they didn't ask for, and robbed of the final dignity of passing in peace. They become passive participants in their own story, watching helplessly as others make decisions for them. But when someone has the chance to choose their ending, to exit with grace, surrounded by love rather than trauma, it changes everything. It transforms death from something feared into something honored, from something fought against into something accepted. This doesn't mean that everyone will make the same choice. Some people will fight until the very last breath, and that choice is just as sacred. The point is not that there is one right way to die. It's that there should be a choice at all. The right to die is not about promoting death, it's about protecting the personal freedom to decide what matters most in those final days. It is about ensuring that people are not forced into prolonged suffering just because society hasn't yet found the courage to trust them with their own ending. When we talk about the right to die, we are really talking about the right to be human until the very end. We are talking about honoring life by respecting the way it ends. We are talking about love, respect, and empathy, not fear, guilt, or shame. Everyone deserves the chance to leave this world the way they lived in it, with choice, with meaning, and with their head held high. And when we make space for that, we're not just changing how people die, we're changing how we value life itself.